bronche, that's how we say brunch.
Here's to the ladies who say basic with their lunch.
You want that bochinche?
Paquete con pinche, you hear what they said?
Not too busy, glasses clinking.
Aquí en esta mesa se respeta como ñón.
Si la copa está llena, yo te doy la bendición.
So what if we get ratchet?
We from the Bronx.
That's it.
Don't get it twisted.
We be going to Manhattan. Be a
Be
queen.
a boss.
Ladies who brunch and poppin' off.
Hey, we pop and pop it off. We pop.
All right. The episode's about to start.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Ladies Who Bronche. I am Julissa.
What's good, everybody? This is Skittles.
And this week, it took entirely too long for this moment to come, and it's totally our fault. But this week, we have somebody who, all right, I'm going to give a deeper intro this week. Because really, really, truly, and I've said this before, but I'm going to reiterate it again on your episode. Somebody who really inspires me. And somebody who really motivates me to continue doing the work that I do and to stand grounded in my truth as I do the work that I do. And somebody who I will never forget, parent-teacher conference, my father was outside talking to her mother in Spanish. I was like, who he found? And it was Catherine's mama, LAZO. Who the fuck are you?
Oh, my God. What's good, everybody? I'm Cat. No. Hello, everyone. I'm Cat LAZO. I am a host. I'm a producer. I'm a director. A lot of folks probably know me from the series that I developed called The Cat Call, a video series that debunks the misconceptions about Latinos, Latinx.
Yes.
And I am also a friend of both Julissa and Skittles.
Yes.
I'm sure we're going to get into that, maybe, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we met at LaGuardia High School.
Yes.
You was 1 year above us, but she was very kind. She was not one of those people who were like above, like senior to you, who like treated you like shit, or at least me. I didn't get that like bullying. We were in the same department. We were in the drama department. Who were your 3 teachers actually, or 4 teachers rather?
Oh my God. Okay, so just a heads up. I don't know if people know this about me, but I do have very bad memory. So here we go. So Mr. L, aka Lobenhofer, Richard Harden, R.I.P.
R.I.P.
No.
Did you have Nagel?
I didn't have Nagel. I think I only had L and
Harden. Sort of
and then I
interchangeably.
would sneak
Moody?
into who?
Moody? Mr. James
No,
Moody.
I was just going to say. I would sneak into Mr. Moody's, not his classes, but his lunchtime.
Ooh,
so I don't know if you remember, but he would basically have lunch in the like drama department, but like in the classes. And I just felt like I never had him as a teacher. And honestly, like he was the only
black dude.
Only black person, only black teacher. So I was just like, let me just sit in during these lunches and just, observe and interact and
soak in
it.
all the Moody gems.
Yes.
Yes, he's an interesting man. Shout out to James Moody. So you mentioned the Cat Call and some of the work that you do. Tell us a little bit about what inspired you to move away from just doing acting and taking on a fuller suite of talents.
So when I was younger, obviously, I went to LaGuardia because I wanted to be an actress. And to try to make a long story short, I really, LaGuardia was for me, it was a space where I felt very safe-ish. We had lots of colorblind casting.
Right.
So in a world, outside where folks would cast based on strictly your race, your ethnicity, my experience at LaGuardia was one where it was here, any roles, whatever, take it, do it, even if it was even gender, it was fuck it up, switch it up. And then I graduated. I had a manager and an agent. FYI, all of this was also navigating, to put people more in context, I'm navigating this as, how old are you when you graduate? 18?
18.
Yeah.
I'm 18, navigating this by myself, unlike the other people that I went to school with who, had parents who were in the industry, who were either already working in the theater district or, had parents who were actors or who were producers or who were casting agents or whatever the hell. I had no context for that. So I was literally 18-year-old me going into an agent's office and signing a contract and being I don't know what the fuck I'm signing.
Right.
So navigating that and then walking into auditions as an 18-year-old girl who was still very much developing her own identity as a whole, still developing also her like critical thinking skills as it revolved around like identity, gender, race, and all of that stuff, and walking into like casting rooms where, you know, majority of the time, if not all the time, it was like, you know, white men who were the casting directors. And I noticed, I think for me, like a big point of the development of like, I guess, my critical thinking when it comes to quote unquote Latinidad and colorism that exists within us, you know, had to do with my experiences in those casting rooms. Because I would go, you know, for roles, for, you know, the Latina role, and I would see how sometimes the rooms would start out mixed, you know, like in terms of a hue. You saw women who looked like me, you know, I would say quintessential Latina looking, you know, light brown, straightish hair. And there were like, you know, other women in there who were darker. But then as the casting calls would happen and you had the second callback, I noticed, I'm like, wait a second, everybody got a whole lot lighter now. Like to the point where I was like, am I the darkest person in here? And so, and that's an issue. I know you can't see me because this is a podcast, but I'm pretty fair. And so I say that to say that like, I would enter these spaces and, my presence, I noticed folks were accepting, but then, you know, being like, you're not Latina enough. And like the nuances in that too, right? Because I'm Colombian and I'm half Colombian, half Peruvian. And New York is a very like Caribbean centric space when it comes to Latinos, because they are the dominant Latino. Shout out to Dominicans. Dominicans, Puerto Ricans. And so I think like, and then you have like the overall general Latino representation, which is like mainly like Mexican, right? And so I'm none of those. And so when I walked into spaces, people were confused by my accent. Also because I have, you know, two parents with two different accents, my accent when I speak Spanish is different, and I'm Americanized, so I have like a really white girl Spanish accent that's like maybe a little Colombian, maybe a little Peruvian, maybe a little like nothing. And so people would just be like, that was, I don't know, but like, can you say that a little more urban? I remember, I know I'm like, now I'm running. I don't even remember what you asked me, but I have a vivid memory, and I have very little vivid memories. The first audition I ever went on, and I was younger than 18, I think I had to go with a parent legally, was for a PSA to encourage kids to not skip school. I never saw this PSA, and I also didn't follow it. But and the commercial was something along the lines of like a young girl is calling out to her friend from her friend is like up in an apartment, and her friend is being like, "Hey, come out! You should come to school." And I remember I did it probably something like that, and the casting director was like, "That was great. Now, can you say it a little more urban?" And that was the first time I ever heard that sentence. And I was like, and it goes to show you, you know, like I was offended, but at the same time, I was like, I know exactly what you want. I was like, "Hey, girl, can you please come to school, please?" And so I say this to say that was like back-to-back auditions that were like that, where I think it was outsiders, men, it was non-Latino people who were basically judging not your acting skills, because when you are a non-white actor, no one is really, at least entry-level acting, no one is judging your acting. Everyone's judging how well you fit into that stereotype, you know? And so that took a really, really big emotional toll on me, and I just was like, this is not for me. I'm done. This is chipping away at my emotional health. And I just started working behind the camera. I'm self-taught. I've literally taught myself how to edit, how to film, the mechanics of a camera via YouTube.
Right.
Like, honestly,
you and
YouTube.
Skittles
both.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just like YouTube tutorials. In college, like I didn't have a big desktop. I don't even think I had a laptop at that moment. And I would sit in at the computer lab, like during my lunch breaks or the gaps that I had in between classes. And they had all of like the fancy software, like Adobe and whatnot. And I would take it, you know, on me, and I would just like sit there for hours, just like using the software while watching tutorials to try to teach myself. And yeah, from there, I mean, I'm laughing at myself now because I know I started this by saying, like, to make a long story short, I just made a YouTube channel and implemented the skills that I learned. And then folks kind of caught on that there was someone who knew what she was doing with a camera, you know, built up my my freelance career.
Right.
And from there just got hired by other folks, including Me Too, and that's where the cat call came out.
Yeah.
That was not a short story.
No,
guys.
but
it was a
important.
worthwhile journey.
Yeah.
Like, to hear, like, what you went through and how it really came about, and to know that it wasn't just something that you just woke up one day and was like, I want to make these empowering videos. It was literally like your experience as a woman that influenced.
Yeah, and I think, and even a step further than that, because I remember like when I had first and like started seeing that your like content was coming out, like, and I think this was even, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if it was before Stuart Weitzman or maybe after I had left Stuart Weitzman, because fun fact, we also worked at a shoe store together when we were in college. You know, so I couldn't, but I remember when I saw it, and I was just, and I remember thinking like, oh wow, I didn't even know Kat was so passionate about these things, and I remember thinking it was super dope, and then thinking like, oh, okay, and it makes sense because like she's a Latina, but she's a little ambiguous. So of course, marketing wise, like it makes sense that she would get cast. That's dope. Not knowing the context until we like reconnected and started working together more, and like you had reconnected with Skittles, and we went to the YouTube thing, that I started to really understand. Oh no, she's a boss bitch. Like she literally like created this for herself. It was not that she fit, and this is going back because like in LaGuardia, like in our last year, you do this like audition showcase and like, you know, to see if agents will want you and stuff like that. And I very much similar to Kat's experience was like, you know, the way people want me to present when I have a piece of paper in front of me, they want me to read it the way they see me and how I look. And so I often, and being like a larger woman than a lot of the other women around me, and not even just fat, I mean like tall and like just bigger in general, I'd always get roles. So either they were like, oh, but she sounds too nice to be like bullyish. So then they're like, we don't really know what to do with you. So I'm always like that like friend, like that like ride or die friend who's just like really smart, but also like really meek and like doesn't see herself as beautiful and blah, blah, blah. And it was a typecast where it was kind of like, yeah, well, that some of that is true to who I am as a person, but like, why does that have to be the kind of black woman I am? Because I'm not outrageous enough to be like this big, like, you know, bully girl, but I'm not meek enough, or I'm not small enough and poised enough to be your Juliet to the Romeo, right? So like it was very weird, and I just didn't fuck with it immediately because I knew what they didn't know about me. And so I went through like my first, I would say like 2 to 3 years out of LaGuardia, spent a lot of time internalizing that and seeing some of our peers' success and being like, yeah, they're super talented, but that makes sense because the way this world is set up for them, that's why they also got it. And like, and feeling like this, that like not understanding the work that people still, even amongst the privilege that they may or may not have to work through. So I think it's really important that like that part of your story is always highlighted, because it's very easy to be like, oh, of course Kat makes sense. And you do make sense. You're fucking talented, but this is coming from you. This is not somebody putting a script in your hand and saying, hey Kat, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that, okay, yes. That is really important for people to understand, because often I do get comments of like, oh, okay, like I'm just a personality. It takes me off when people say I'm either an influencer or a personality, when there's so much work that I put into the videos that you see.
You don't just show up as talent and say, okay, what do you need me to do? You're doing these projects.
Yeah. I think when it comes to anything that you see visibly with me in front of the camera, I can understand why people, if, you know, they don't understand the full story, they're like, oh, Me Too must have given her a script and she does this and that's it. But any projects that you've ever seen me in front of the camera, you know, I don't sign on. Like just recently I had a meeting with another company who wants me to come on to host a series, and I told them, I'm like, you can't really find me on IMBD. So if you want me on board, then you also have to bring me on board as either a writer or a producer.
Come on.
Because that's not how I work. You know? Like I could have, and I've chosen not to. So, and it's also in my nature. It's kind of, I guess, my type A behavior where I'm like, I'm going to end up suggesting people that we should interview, and I'm going to end up suggesting locations that we should use, and, you know, all this stuff, which makes me a producer, and it's going to make the content better. So just give me that credit. Because I'm not just a pretty face, and
Thank you.
Yes, fuck it up.
Yeah, and I like, so sort of like, because we're digging into this, but I love this. And when you're you're representing the Latinx community to the degree in which you can, I want to hear a little bit about some of the pushback that you get from our own community on the content that you're creating.
Pushback that I get from our community.
In terms of like, because there's one thing we can say about the cat call is that it's not afraid to be honest, even though it does so in a way that is not, it doesn't like block people off, right? Like it's not meant to be so like hardcore and like in your face. And if you're not down with this means you're ignorant. Like it doesn't call people out in a way where it labels them as one thing because they don't know something. It's an opportunity of like, hey, by the way, here's the facts, just presenting it. And here's the context as to why it's set up this way. And it's, hey, maybe not even necessarily your fault, but like, let's talk about it, right? And then there's some people who might be like, nah, how could you say that as a Latina? How could you do that as a Latina, even in our own community?
To give more background, I was hired by Me Too. This is now 3 years ago. And I was working there as a producer, meaning I had been making content that didn't involve me being in front of the camera at all. And the content that I was making as an East Coast Latina, because overwhelmingly amount of the folks who work there were West Coast.
Right.
And that's what all of those platforms unfortunately.
Yes. I think except for Remezcla. But, and so when I came on, I was basically just highlighting a lot of the people that I felt needed to be amplified. And that so happened to be in the world of like digital Latinx representation, it happened to be more marginalized voices. So we're talking Afro-Latinos, we're talking like queer Latinos and I realized that without intentionally doing it, I was disrupting the natural feed of that platform, right? Because if the majority of the producers were producing things from their perspective, aka West Coast, aka perhaps a Chicano, perhaps a Mexican perspective, mine wasn't that. And so these videos that I was making were really disrupting that feed. And what I mean by that is like the comments were really like, oh, you know, this is not what I came to meet you for. Like, what the hell? Like, and a lot of like overt racism, a lot of overt homophobia. And so for me, when I was reading these comments, I was like, a lot of folks, my coworkers, were like, oh, don't let it get to you. Don't let it get to you. You know, like haters will be haters. Continue doing the work that you're doing, because the work I was doing was still getting a lot of views. But I felt like, one, these comments didn't have to do with me. I'm not in front of the camera, right? It was like the people, they were really criticizing, unfortunately, the people who were in front of the camera. And I felt like a big sense of responsibility as someone who had some kind of power as a content creator to kind of hold people's hands through a conversation. And so that's how the cat call came about. And so when you say things like, yeah, you know, the cat call isn't something where it's like in your face, you know, calling people ignorant or something like that, that's really intentional. Right. Because I personally, as someone who also holds like a lot of privileged identities, I feel it's my responsibility to put in that extra labor and that extra work to try to, you know, call in that community, you know, like the non-Black, you know, folks, and explain to them colorism in order to take that labor away from folks who are already experiencing, let's say we're just using race and racism as an example, who are already experiencing racism, right? Right. So that's how the cat call came about, as a way to, what I say, hold our community's hand through a difficult conversation.
Yes, that's beautiful. And thank you for putting so much time and effort on behalf of the communities that are still part of your community, right? Even if they're like, you know, like for me as a Black woman, right, or Afro-Latina, because now we were talking a little bit offline about like using the term Afro-Latina versus just Black. And like, I often do say I'm Black. And I used to use it as a vehicle of people being like, no, you're not. And I used to be like, yeah, Afro-Latino. And then I would follow up with Afro-Latino as a like, boom, new term for your ass. Like, I am Black, right? And so, but like even communities like that, like even the opportunities you've given me to like come on board and support some of your projects like that.
Oh my God, I completely forgot. Julissa wrote for the cat call.
No, totally.
When I tell you that I have bad memory, like honestly.
All good. No, but to say that like opportunities like that are important. And so I wanted to say that only to say that it's not just the conversations that you hold for these other communities, it's the way in which you include them in your work that is super important, because when other people say no, right, when you have that like power in the room, you say yes. And so everybody else has to say yes, you know, or not has to. I know it's a battle, but even which is why I'm saying it holds even more value, because it's not as simple as you snapping your finger and everyone's like, I'm on board. You have to advocate. And so I think it is important for people to really understand that side, because, you know, even like on your social media, you're awesome, you're engaging, you're fun, you're funny, like people know that. But I think people need to understand that all of that they get is also a result of a lot of hard personal labor and passing up on projects and things because you're upholding integrity, and that, you know what I mean? Rather than just being like, well, I low-key need this come up, so I'm gonna act like that's not an issue and just take my come up and shut the fuck up. Like, that's not the person that you are. And so I respect the shit out of that. So
yes,
no
you.
one give me any more gin, because I swear to God,
because we're drinking gin and lemonade.
yes. So, Kat, we are about to go into our brunch questions. When you are out at brunch with the girls, what is your go-to bebida?
I love gin.
Same.
That's what we're drinking here.
Yes.
I've learned that it is very uncommon for women to drink gin.
Apparently.
Because every time I order gin at a bar, whenever there's a male bartender, which is usually the case, they'll always make a comment like, gin, who taught you how to drink gin?
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Gin
I
is
don't
a
know who
man's
taught
drink?
you how to drink anything. What are you talking about? But I love gin. And I like gin paired with anything that's like citrusy. Yes. So like, if there is good lemonade, I love a good gin and lemonade.
Yeah.
Which is what you all have provided me today.
Yes.
Which is why I'm going to be a mess.
I'm a gin girl too. I've gone through phases in my life. I went through a heavy whiskey phase where I was drinking Maker's Mark and ginger with everything because I thought it made me cool because I drank Maker's Mark. And then I moved to gin, and I've never jumped off of it. Like I don't see the end of my gin journey.
Do you see a difference between gin and vodka?
Absolutely.
All
There
right.
is a grand difference between gin and vodka.
Y'all are so fucking extra. Like,
to give people some background, prior to recording, Skittles had the audacity
my God.
to say
Bitch had
that
audacity.
gin is just like vodka.
I meant this in the sense of, because I saw that y'all was pairing it. First off, I didn't see that in the new all the new Amsterdam bottles look the same until you look at the little band at the bottom that says gin or vodka. And
so you know that, but you decided to assume
and
before
I
reading.
thought that y'all were drinking vodka and lemonade, which is also a good, refreshing pairing, which is why I said same thing to the gin and vodka and the vodka.
Right.
I mean,
so it's not the same thing.
Skittles, I love you, but just
it's not the same thing. It is not the same thing. And I will say that for me with gin, like I could never drink a vodka soda. I've tasted them, I don't like them, but I can do a gin and soda endlessly. Like you can give me bottomless gin and seltzer,
This is why I particularly don't like vodka, because I think vodka for me was the entry. As I think it's also for a lot of people,
because it's
when
the
you
cheapest.
First start drinking, what do you get at the club? You get
vodka
the vodka
cranberry.
Vodka.
Why I said it like that? Vodka cranberry.
So I feel like when I drink vodka, I'm automatically like, oh, flashback to like really bad times in my life where I was like, yeah, vodka cranberry.
Right. Yes.
Nah, I like a good vodka and juice. I like gin and juice. I like whiskey and juice. The things that I can't do anymore that give me bad flashbacks is like apple flavored any type of liquor, like
Any-
apple
You should have
flavored
never done
rum
that,
or
period.
like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
flavored like vodka, and it's always that's my thing. Vodka tends to be the liquor that does the like peach, vanilla, like all this shit, and it's like it's unnecessary.
vanilla.
It's unnecessary.
Anyway, so when you're out to brunch, drinking your fucking gin and lemonade and not your vodka lemonade, what is your go-to favorite brunch plate?
Okay, because I've been anticipating coming to this podcast for 3
3
years.
years.
That's me throwing a lot of shade
A lot of it.
onto all of you all. But anyways, I'll say this. I'm a salty, savory type of bitch.
Yes.
Okay.
So I don't like sweets.
No pancakes
I
and French
cannot
toast
do
for you.
pancakes. I
No
can't
French
do
toast.
French toast. I
No
can't
waffles.
do no waffles. It just feels very heavy to me. It's too much.
Not even chicken and
sweetness.
waffles?
I can't. I don't even like chicken and waffles. I know. Come for me.
Yeah.
Drag me. I'm here for it. So anything that is like more on the savory side, I can do. You know, the eggs Benedict. I like a good like ranchero type.
Yeah.
Of,
Yes.
you know, nice little mix of that. But I will call myself out and say, even though I don't like anything that's sweet, if I am at brunch with someone who orders something sweet,
You
I
about
do
to
want
taste
to
it.
bite.
Wow. Because you just want a little
a
taste.
bite.
You don't want a whole plate.
You
I
a
just want-
biter.
I want to touch.
Bite.
But are you sharing your savory meal?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
a share.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you better share at the same quantity.
Yo, I'm that bitch. I literally, when you said that, I was like, but you gotta even make sure that it's even, because
Yeah,
like I'll
bite
share
for
with you,
bite.
but it gotta be an even exchange. We're not doing this.
But you can't like want half of my meal.
Right,
I
and it's
just want-
also I have
that's equity.
and I have a shrimp rule. If I'm eating shrimp, everybody knows they be counting them little shrimp.
Yo.
You want to taste my
Yo,
plate with shrimp in it?
nah,
You can't just
okay.
have my shrimp. No, don't call
The
Derek
other
out.
day,
Nope, nope.
what are you talking about? I'm not talking about Derek. I'm talking about the other day I ordered a shrimp or broccoli that came with 4 shrimps, and the rest was
Where?
broccoli.
Wow.
Where was this called about?
In the Bronx, Wang Eastern.
Wang East.
Y'all fucked up.
That's rude.
That's because you ain't ordered.
And I'm
from-
tight because that's the Chinese restaurant that knows how to get into my complex and delivers to my door.
Wow. Yeah.
Like they have the fancy caller ID that they memorize your address.
Yeah.
4 shrimps.
4 shrimps. Did you call
Did
them?
you call? Yeah.
I didn't.
See,
You need
pussy.
to get white woman on there.
Always with my food orders, I get real Sarah real quick. I'm sorry, hi. I just made the order for blah 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 blah. Yeah, I don't believe it's for shrimp, right? Because I'm pretty sure, and I start going down that route, and then they just I annoy them
Although-
just to like.
Although I will say that I only use my like producer white woman tactics, you know, on a more if it's like a family owned restaurant, then I'm like, all right,
Yeah.
I'm gonna give you some slack.
Yeah.
But if it's like, you know, you're at brunch at this fancy place,
Oh, no.
I'm like, oh no.
If
no,
I'm
I
paying
will pull out the Yelp.
$14 for this avocado toast, if I'm paying $14 for avocado and some motherfucking bread, you better believe I better have every fucking piece of whatever is supposed to come on here. The eggs, the everything. No, that definitely is a
Disrespect.
rule. But I will say, having one of my best friend's parents owns a Chinese food shop in the Bronx, and sometimes the shade be intentional. And because I know that, because he confirmed it for me, and obviously not all Chinese stores, but like,
This specific one.
you know what I mean?
That's
but like,
crazy.
I don't put it past them. And also, and that now I'm saying this, I'm like, we need to have David on the podcast. But like, also there are ways in which the way that, you know, the Chinese community views the Black and brown communities in which they have these stores in always plays a role in how they're facilitating their business. And not to say that they're all racist, but some of them really like, you know, think of these stereotypes as truths, and so they'll treat you a certain way, and you're not making it up in your head. So just that's the only reason when it's the Chinese food store, I'm like, nah.
That is a
Give me all my
combo.
shrimp. It should have been 6
Yeah.
at
That is
least.
a real combo to be had.
That's a real
but
conversation.
on
Not right
this
now.
episode.
Not right now. So moving along, Kat, tell us a little bit about what it was like going out to eat when you were growing up.
Ooh, I forgot about this.
Yeah.
This question. Okay, so I have, I think, a weird. I grew up thinking of going out to eat a little differently than I think some of my peers, Because to me, McDonald's was like
Me too.
fancy restaurant.
Same here, sis.
Like, my mom would always cook at home. Unfortunately, there was a lot of inequity at my house. My mom is a housekeeper. She worked really late hours. My father works as a packaging designer. Look it up. I didn't know what it was when I was growing up. And he would get home at like a traditional hour, like 3, 4, 5. My mom would get home at 8. And unfortunately, due to gender dynamics, we would have to wait for her to get home to cook.
Wow.
But anyways, my mom would cook. And so we had meals at home, but on occasion, it was time to go out to eat.
Yes.
And so McDonald's to me was like, oh, this is for rich white people.
Yep, for real.
Or for example, when I would go with my mom to help her clean the apartments, these rich white people never had food in their refrigerators, but they had TV dinners. Right, like Hungry Man.
Yes,
I don't know if you're familiar
yes,
with like the
I
Hungry
was.
Man meal.
Yes.
So I grew up thinking that TV dinners, and in particular Hungry Man, like I told you, I got bad memories. So the fact that I remember this is like a miracle. That the Hungry Man TV dinner was like, this is some classy shit.
Yes.
And little did I know that, like, no, ma'am, it is not. McDonald's is not classy. What your mom is cooking at home is way classier than that. But when we went out to eat, also I would say that when we did go out to eat, my mom is Colombian and my father is Peruvian, and my mother, both of my parents have very different immigrant stories in the fact that my mom came here with her whole tribe. She's one of 7. She had her mother, her father, my grandmother, my grandfather here, and so she had very much a tribe here when she arrived. My father came solo, and his entire family is still in Peru. So when we went out to eat, there was also a special moment that would happen when we would go out and eat Peruvian food, because I would also see the joy in my father's face. And when my father would cook also at home, the very few times that he did growing up, it was like Peruvian dishes.
Right.
And so there was something very special about going out to eat at the Peruvian restaurants that we would eat at, because I saw the joy that it would bring to my father. It was a form that a way for my father to connect back to his roots and feel like he wasn't missing out. And I think I like caught on to that as a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like a quick comment on like the whole like fast food dynamic being something that's fancy, like that was absolutely true for me as somebody whose mother also used to cook every day, blah, blah, blah. And I think that at some point in like, you know, marketing history land, they caught on to that, like the, like, you know, marketers for companies like McDonald's and stuff. And that's when we started to see a lot of explosion, like even around I'm Loving It, like when that campaign launched, like, and that was when McDonald's was trying to like redeem itself after all the lawsuits because of people saying I'm fat because of McDonald's. The Super Size Me. That's what I was. Yeah, that's why I was like, what's the name of the thing? Yeah, so Super Size Me. And I remember seeing like a surge in, because my mom would always on the TV with Univision was like stuck on my living room TV, and I would notice that. And in the moments of like, oh, we have a Latinx family, it would always be like this moment of like the kid being extra excited because it's so rare that they're about to step into this McDonald's and and like that, and even sometimes when it's black families, but like, you know, when it was like more white targeted, I would never get that, like the narrative would feel a little different, but I can always feel the sense that they knew that it was special, so they would market it to us as
and
special.
even the dollar menu,
Yo,
like shit like the dollar menu. When the dollar menu came out,
that was a huge deal, and I didn't. My first time. Okay, so. Sorry, we're like talking about McDonald's, but
Not sponsored.
Not sponsored.
Not
by,
sponsored.
Although if you're trying to throw me some coin, but you know, for me, I think like I will never forget this. I was in middle school. I was in an after school program, and because we went on a trip really late, they gave the facilitator a stipend or petty cash rather, so that they can buy us food. So when we were in McDonald's, like they were like, "Oh, you guys have $15 each." And I remember being like, $15, that's mad money. Because every time I went with my mom, I was only allowed to get stuff from the dollar menu. $1 menu sandwich, fries, and if I wanted a sundae, that meant I wasn't getting a drink. Like, it was like almost like a $3 before tax limit. So it was the first time in my life I was able to order something that was a numbered meal. And at the time, the chicken select strips had just
Oh my God, I remember those too.
And it was like I don't think, like, it's so simple and silly, but like it was a moment of empowerment for me. One, because it was the first time I was able to make a food decision on my own, where my parents weren't having an opinion on what I'm picking. And I ordered the 5-piece instead of the 3 because I was like, $15, so I could get the 5-piece. I could do, and it was like and it was like the most I think I had ever enjoyed McDonald's to date. And it was just more about having a different experience in this space where I always had one specific experience, you know. So anyway, just wanted to share that.
It's true, though.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can add one more anecdote. It would be that, you know how like grandparents are always alcahuetas? I don't know if that translates. Like, how do you say
like,
that? They spoil you.
Yeah.
Your parents back. And so my grandfather on my mom's side, I know he would always be like, "Oh, I'm just gonna take a Catherine al parque." And really what he would do was bring me to McDonald's. Like, buy me, a meal from McDonald's, like the Happy Meal. And I'd be like,
right.
Oh my God.
Yes.
This is so special. I'm not supposed to have this.
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. And so I was about to be like, okay, Catherine. I don't know why I was about to call you Catherine. I channeled some ancestor of yours. I was like, Catherine. All right. So what is your favorite bochinche topic to talk about over a meal?
I have 2. One is like personal relationships, sex.
Yes.
Always sex.
Sexual, adventures. And then the other one is always like industry.
Yeah.
It's always I happen to have friends who are either content creators, producers, influencers, whatever, and there's always the close friends group on IG, let's just say, where you get the real cheese, man. You get the real dirt on what's happening.
I love that. All right, guys, and now we're moving into our Cheers to the Ladies Who section, where we shout out dope moments and dope people doing dope shit. We got some sort of justice recently around Harvey Weinstein's case. So he was charged with rape in one of several counts, and there was another count that he was found guilty on. So we didn't get the full justice. Not everything came to justice, but Harvey Weinstein was charged with rape. That sentence is very powerful in the context of what we've been experiencing overall with the Me Too movement, right? And so I remember, after Bill Cosby had gotten, when he went to jail and he got charged, a lot of people had this question around, like, well, will this white man also be charged? Like, yes, Bill Cosby, stay your ass in jail, but white man, are you going to be joining him? Are y'all going to be cellmates? Because both of y'all motherfuckers need stuff. So I think that is important that he got charged to some degree. I don't love that it wasn't all the charges, because I strongly believe all of the women that came forward against him. But, that's neither here nor there. It is a needle that has been moved, and I think it's worth celebrating, even if it wasn't sort of actualized to the full potential that everybody had hoped. Now that has happened, though, and because Harvey Weinstein has really been the name that has been keeping the movement alive, not because he keeps it alive, but rather like the way we process news these days, we remember there's a million things to worry about. We remember and prioritize which one we care about the most this week, oftentimes by what's in the news. And so I, sort of wanted to have a conversation around how do we make sure that the purpose of this movement and the calls to actions around this movement remain alive, even though like one of the big monsters in the case have been, or in the cause have been brought down in terms of the industry. But we have to remember that even though the Me Too movement the conversation has widely been around people who have been victimized by people who have power in these sorts of industries, women getting raped, or people in general, but I'm speaking as a woman, women getting raped, is still a large issue, and there's still ways in which the justice system does not serve us well. And there's actually an exhibit here in New York, and I feel bad that I can't remember the artist's name, where they collected rape kits from over 30 states, and they have them lined up on the wall because they want to show the discrepancy, where even from state to state, the way people are investigating rape cases is not even, there's not even consistency there, right? So there's still a shit ton of work to do, even amidst the celebration of Harvey Weinstein getting some sort of punishment. So I'd love to hear your general thoughts around the movement, or around ways or areas of opportunity where you think we now need to rally to continue the work.
I will jump in and just say that everything that you just said brought to mind a particular interview with Oprah and Lady Gaga, where she was talking about her story as a survivor, and how she suffers from fibromyalgia now, which is a side effect from the trauma. And just bringing up the point that, yes, it's like you said, Harvey Weinstein was like a big deal, but someone like Lady Gaga, who is essentially one of the most famous pop stars in the world and has paved the way for a lot of women, won't come forward and say who is her rapist, because she says that everybody in the industry has somebody on someone else. And so it's one of those things like, yeah, we got Harvey, but there's a bunch of little assholes, asshole rapists running around in this industry. Yeah. And I feel like that is something that's definitely something that women are gonna come up against in trying to keep this movement moving forward.
Absolutely.
And I think it's worth, you have Lady Gaga who's out here who says that stuff. You have Kesha who just, had to pay Dr. Luke for defamation, who in text messages claimed that Katy Perry was raped. So you have all these women who are out here.
Right.
And who knows
what's truth,
what's going on with them, and what's true, what's not. And I don't really know how we remedy that, but I know that that'll be an obstacle for this movement and keeping it alive. And I don't know that I have an answer.
Yeah, no, I think that's an answer.
Other than,
that's an answer. And I think that's why I've imposed the question, because I myself find it difficult to understand what, role for lack of a better word, but because I think I understand what roles I can play, but I don't understand what is the most high impact thing that I can do. What is a thing that is not just speaking on the topic, which is very important, right? Because there are people who even on a basic level, when we define consent, aren't on the same page about what consent is, right? So even still having these educational conversations is very important. But I don't know, I myself feel personally motivated to consider other things, other ways that I can contribute and help keep the movement alive. That's not just talking about it. So Kat, what are your thoughts?
I mean, two things come to mind. One being that when we say things like, this is a win, Weinstein, will be in jail, we have to remember that at what cost? We have to remember that it took the bravery
of several
women. Yeah. I want to say, even when we talk about Bill Cosby, it took the bravery of several women. Right. And we have to remember there is a disparity, right, of how white women and black women are believed when it comes to sexual assault, when it comes to rape.
Right. And in both cases, it was majority white women who came forward. And that's not to take away in any way, shape, or form the bravery that it takes, but just in terms of how that sprung in action on these men. Yeah.
So be mindful that, Weinstein wasn't just oh, okay, cool, he's being put in jail. Yay, this is a win. We have to be mindful of whose labor went into making this happen, right? Because yet again, it had to fall on the victims, the survivors' labor to do so, to make that choice to speak up. Right. And to have to relive an experience that, to say the least, is uncomfortable. Right. Also, I think that we use a lot of celebrity conversation or issues to talk about like every day. And we need to make sure that, like, for the everyday guy, you don't have to, you know, rape in particular is seen as this very, like, what does rape look like? It looks like a woman yelling, no, you're a stranger, it's an alleyway. And I think that we get into really problematic, like, conversations when we just focus on the celebrity, because then other men, and I'm solely talking about men, and y'all can come for me for that, but like when men are like, well, you know, I don't ever like pull a woman and force her to have sex, therefore I'm not a rapist, you know, it can look like other things. Sex without consent can look like other things. It can look like you are a, I don't know, 31-year-old who is, you know, having sex with a 17-year-old girl. Right. You know, like, it can look like stuff like that. Right. And so, you know, we need to put pressure on these conversations to look a little bit more nuanced. And for within our community, you know, maybe not even just rape, but, you know, like, things that kind of perpetuate rape culture. Right. So things like street harassment. Yes. And I know for some it's like, oh, get over it, you know, like you can't take a compliment, but the fact that you feel so entitled that you can say such vulgarity to me as I'm walking down the street is something that is very much upholding rape culture. Right. And how do we have these conversations in a way that, in all honesty, aren't just echoing in the same chorus in the same circle, and that's accessible to, you know, our brothers, our uncles, our tios, in a way that they can understand it, you know, that they don't feel not isolated, what's the word, ostracized, you know, like, oh, okay, this is some like white people talk, this is some like academic shit, like, you know, that's not me. Right. How can we cultivate conversations that's going to be accessible to everyone?
Yeah, and I honestly, like, I think, and I've sort of like grappled with this for some time, and I will also speak in this moment specifically around men, just because statistically that's where the majority of the issue lies. I think the answer is in the same way that we need white people to step up and hold their people accountable. I think we need more men in the conversation leading some of that, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, I want to
go for it.
You're absolutely right. I think that a lot of the time it's women who are doing the labor of educating. And to answer your question, I believe your question was something along the lines like, what can we do? Yeah. And I think that it's up to the men who, quote unquote, know better. Right. The ones who are tuning in, who are listening, who are active, who know. When you're in that moment, when someone is saying or doing something that is upholding rape culture, that labor needs to be on you. Right. And I'm really passionate right now. I got like goosebumps because I remember one time in particular where I was with a group of people and with two men who knew better, who DK are allies or whatnot, whatever language you want to use. And there was one individual, one guy, who said something along the lines of, a woman was texting one of these men and was saying like, come over, oh my God, you know, like I'm so drunk, like da-da-da-da, like, oh my God, I really want you. And one individual was like, oh my God, you should definitely go, and like, she's basically asking to be raped. You should just go rape that bitch. Like, and this is something where it wasn't even nuanced, you know what I mean? The language that was being used wasn't even something that we can like sit down and be like, let's unpack it. It's like, no, you are acknowledging that this is rape culture. Yeah. And I remember that I was literally, and I feel like I'm reliving it because I was infuriated. And I called this guy out. By the way, this guy was like a stranger to me. It was, let's say it was like 4 people, and that person was a stranger to me. I did not know him. And the 3 other people, 2 men, 1 woman, they were friends of mine. And I was the only one to speak up in that moment. And I did so, and I remember that guy's response when I told him, I'm like, are you really saying this? Like, do you know what you're saying? And he's like, what's it to you? Were you raped? And I was like, whoa.
Yo.
And I just felt very attacked in that moment. You know, that's no one's business.
That's a
It's
fight
also
on my
like,
block.
yeah. But I say this to say that,
wow.
you know, I give that as an example of like when something like that happens, you know, I think it's the responsibility on folks who have more privilege. And in that moment, it's men, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Who they can know better to call that person out or in or however you choose to, so that women who are constantly faced with harassment and faced with having to unravel rape culture and who experience rape culture, for you to do that labor.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. I
Behind closed doors.
Yeah.
And in front.
Yeah.
Both of those things are true.
Right.
You know, like in your locker room or whatever people call it, you know, like on the stoop, you know, with your tios. Have that convo. It's uncomfortable.
Right.
It's hard to have.
Right.
But it is on you.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that there's and this is, I think, you know, in experiences that I've heard of and stuff, there's even a way in which, though, the way that our communities have been conditioned overall, where sometimes these men don't feel as empowered or feel like they can get a pass because there is a woman in the space who doubles down on these notions around like, oh, well, yeah, well, you know, if it was me, I would do this. And so that particular woman is out of the scope of whatever, because it is possible for a woman to, you know, actually just want to do that, or like we don't need to like downplay her drunkenness, she just wants something, you know, like there's always and I find myself in those moments having a hard time sometimes even calling out those women. And it's not that I don't, but I always wonder where it's coming from, and I always find a weird sensitivity. And with men, I don't have that sensitivity. With men, I'm very quick to be like, yo, what the fuck, that's wild, like why are you saying that, da 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 da. But when it's coming out of a woman's mouth, I think it's almost because I get shocked. Like I get shocked when I find that there are women who are like, well, maybe she was asking for it, or I would never dress like that, or like what else did she think was going to happen if she did that. And so I only say that to say that the conversation of like, you know, hey, we need to do better as a community. There's certain things like where I understand where maybe you might draw to this conclusion of how this person brought this onto themselves. That's actually incorrect. And let's go back and retract this through a different lens so you understand why it's not the victim's fault. But we're not always prepared to have these conversations. And so I wonder if part of the answer to my question is, how do we create more safe spaces to have these conversations? Because sometimes the way we think they're supposed to go and the way they're supposed to be had is not going to be the case. And so we want to be able to hold everyone accountable, but make sure that everybody feels like they're being heard in the conversation. Because even for people who have or what in my opinion would be the wrong opinion, or not the good opinion for the greater good, like I think it's important to hear out why they think that. Like, because then how am I going to unteach you something that I don't know how you learned?
Agree. I think that this is a big problem with like cancel culture.
Yes.
As someone who dates men, who has sex with men,
right,
I have the capacity with my partners to explain certain things to these men.
Right.
Right? And I'm trying to undo that, or I don't know if that's a privilege, or I don't know what you call it, but I take on that responsibility. Whereas other women, you know, who don't really interact with men romantically or otherwise are like, I'm not going to fucking explain it because I don't have to deal with you, you know? Like, and that's real too.
Yeah.
But I have that capacity where it's like, with the men that I have proximity to, I choose to have that space of, okay, fuck, like I'm really irritated that you don't know this, that I have to explain this, but I also acknowledge that I have to cultivate space for it.
Right. Right.
You know, but I also need you to understand that this is labor.
Yeah.
This is emotional labor.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm teaching you. You need to fucking acknowledge that.
Right. Absolutely. And then my last sort of thing on this, and when you said cancel culture, that brought this up for me. I recall when, you know, news of Kobe Bryant's death came about. I had a very strange reaction in terms of I actually didn't respond or have any feelings about his previous court case. back 17 years ago, I was more responding to like oh my God, a helicopter crashed. Like that was my initial response, was like a helicopter crash. And the person on there was Kobe Bryant and his daughter. Whoa. Like, and before the 24 hours of the case of the incident had passed, before we even knew how many people were on the helicopter and who had died, the conversation was brought up. Hey, like, are we about to honor this man? Because remember what he did, right? And so I had a weird response in the sense where I was like, oh, yeah, no, we should talk about that. Do we have to talk about it today? Is it today? Like, is there room to leave reverence? Not for him specifically. I'm not saying like, oh, because he died, you got to respect him. It's not about respecting him, but because it wasn't just him and a pilot on a helicopter. You know what I mean? That means there's other people. And then that means like, as we're viewing headlines, like I can't imagine knowing that somebody who was my sibling is on that helicopter and I'm fucking devastated and I'm seeing in the ticker new, like, reminding me, oh, and the guy that was on the plane was a rapist and the guy that on the plane was a rapist the day of. And I literally mean that specifically on the day of the incident. And then, the next day, and quite frankly, like even with Gail, like I don't think it's that no one has the right in these interviews to bring up that court case, right? So I wasn't upset with her for wanting to have the dialogue. I think, if what was said was true and the network tried to sort of like pull that clip so that it would get more views and stuff like that, then that's like really fucked up. But two things can be true. It can be true that we need to have this conversation around rape culture and that he's an example of that. But then it can also be true, and this came out of me doing a little bit more research because quite frankly, I was so young. I didn't remember all the details. So my lack of holding Kobe Bryant accountable over time was I've never been a Lakers fan. So I like just know Kobe's one of the greatest and that's all I needed to know. But I was never like a Kobe fan. But like I didn't remember. What I remembered was like, oh, wasn't it that like they found that actually she was having sex with a bunch of other people and she was lying? And not because I don't believe women, but I was so young, I didn't even have the context to question further. But then I was like, oh shit, but what did he do after that? Like, what was the response? And I think Kobe Bryant is both a great example of how men fall into this sort of like notion that they can just have the sort of sex that they want, and how do we create space for these men or women to unlearn and to revert and like to go through a path of actual like accountability. And what does a path of actual accountability look like? And I believe at the end of like all the back and forth in the court cases, he had said, he did the classic, I apologize. I realized that the experience I was having that night was not the experience that she was having that night. Right. And I did not intend to blah, 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 but you should believe her.
Yeah.
And I just, something about that for me, I'm not saying it absolves him, but I don't know that people would be willing to end that apology with, and you should believe her, rather than being like, this is what I thought and this is what she thought. My bad. It's like, this is what I thought, this is what she thought, but like, there's value in this. Mm-hmm. So like, don't do the thing for me. Like, don't go, like, let's talk about this.
We love binaries.
Yeah.
Right? We love binaries, whether that's race, whether that's like any other type of politics. We love to have a very concrete yes or no. And like you said, both of these things can be true. And when I bring up cancel culture, I question, why are we being critical of systems or people or issues, if it's not for the betterment of people?
Right.
So are we being critical in order for us to feel better and entitled and to be like, I know more than you? Or are we criticizing things for folks to actually learn and grow?
Right.
To be quite honest, I am not very versed on Kobe Bryant.
Right.
So I don't really particularly know his case or the details of it. But yeah, I put that out into the public of like, when we criticize public figures or folks that we have proximity to, our personal friends, are we criticizing them in order to shame them, or are we criticizing them with the hope of growth?
Right. I think that that's key. And that's the thing that we most need to be mindful in any movement, right? So like, this is one movement, but in any movement that is key, because the minute that we decide that we don't care and we don't want to have a two-way conversation, then there can't really be change. Like I in the sense of like, it doesn't mean like, oh, I'm considering what you're saying, so I'm going to change my point of view. Like, what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. But like, can there be learning if we're not in the same spaces or creating somewhere, whether it's somebody who's like, who's stepping up or somebody who does actually hold responsibility? How are we moving forward if we can't actually share the space for dialogue?
But to reiterate, I also acknowledge that for folks who are the victims or the oppressed group, that it can be really fucking tiring.
Right.
So if we talk about the dynamics of like rape culture and the fact that like women are majority of the time the victims, the survivors, who experience rape or rape culture, it can be fucking tiring for us to not only experience it, but then also have to, to undo it, you know, and do the labor of educating folks. So that's why it's important for folks in the privileged group, you know, in this case, like for men, you know, to be the ones to speak up and take on some of that labor. Cause like we are tired.
Yeah. Tired as hell.
Oh, can I have some? Now we will move into our Tuta Loca Es, where we call motherfuckers out for doing the most. And today we are talking about the unfortunate passings of Camila Maria Concepcion and Alexa Negron. Camila was a trans Latina activist and writer who is gaining most popularity most recently for Gentefied, for her work on Gentefied on Netflix. And then Alexa Negron was killed in Puerto Rico shortly before that. And you said Alexa was 27 and Camila was 28.
And a little bit about Alexa Negron, Luciano, I want to throw in because, you know, we got to have all our names in the mix. She was homeless. And she had a presence on social media because people made fun of her. And so the night that she was killed, she went to a McDonald's bathroom, was using the bathroom. Another woman in the bathroom accused her of peeping. So 12 hours later, the police find Alexa, and there is rumored to be a video online of her death that I have yet to see myself, where the New York Times article describes it as Alexa is standing in the headlights of the car, and you hear the shots that are fired, and as you hear the shots that are fired, you hear laughter from those who are surrounding her in that moment. I find, to say the least, that the work that allies to the trans community are doing, for some of us, not all of us, is insufficient. We do not do enough legwork to make sure that safe spaces are truly safe. And the way that we need to make sure a space is safe is by creating a space of intolerance. And I mean really, really heavy intolerance. I mean, people should be shook about this notion that they can step out of line and just kill a trans person or make a trans person uncomfortable and fuck with their mental health and fuck with their status because they feel above them. And I would argue if there was like a social pyramid of how well people are or are not treated in this world, at the bottom of that period are trans women of color. And it boggles my mind how we find it easy to umbrella trans issues under, oh yeah, it's just another issue on the list of issues, blah, 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 blah. And it gives it this nonchalantness, which then ensues us being very nonchalant about the way that we are allies. So for me, I'd say, yeah, I talk about trans issues. I engage the trans community. I share articles, blah, blah, blah. But like, I also share memes, right? So like, is that really labor? Is that really the work that I'm doing? Or are we doing the work to find organizations that are doing the work in the ground and supporting them? Or calling people out, right? Like calling people in and then calling them out. Are we holding institutions accountable? And even if we are not the trans person, I'll use the bathroom thing as an example, who needs a equal gender bathroom, maybe I asked for it anyway because I want to create space for everyone. And even though I don't have a trans person on my staff that I'm aware of, at least that should be there. For example, like there's just basic things that we can be doing that we don't do, and we only react after the fact and when people are getting killed, as opposed to being proactive about creating the safe spaces with the privilege that we have even before the trans person crosses our paths, because that is a true ally and that is a true social justice warrior, right? You learn, right? Because there is that element of really needing to understand the issue and learn the issue. You sympathize, you empathize, but even before all that work happens, if you know, hey, the goal here is this is a space of intolerance, then get busy doing that work in the way that you can.
Get busy, I think also, can be a very ambiguous term.
Also, yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's like, I think that what's important for folks to be mindful of, maybe who don't have a proximity to trans people, and in particular trans people of color, is that if you are educating yourself from a particular person that you're following online, or maybe you're aware of a organization or a coalition that is doing a lot of the labor, like put your money into those people.
Right.
That does go a long way. So for example, in Puerto Rico, you can support Colectiva Feminista. It's a coalition of a lot of Puerto Rican femmes, women, who are doing a lot of work to undo the violence against women and trans people, trans women of color. So put your money where it talks. And I'm doing a lot of reflecting myself, because I was made aware via social media of the passing of these two women, these two trans women, and reflecting on how I can be more intentional. Because you're right. Like, a lot of it is like, okay, you're aware, let me share this story, but how can I hire trans women of color? How can I give them money in order to support their artistry? How can I hire them, to further their career, to put them on, to amplify their stories or their artistry? And just a lot of reflection around that.
Yeah, I'm trying to say this because I don't want to cry. I think one thing that has been really, really informative for me, being Skittles' sister, is even like the way people work so hard to peg people and put them in boxes in order to give themselves permission to treat people a certain way. And when I think about how I move around the world with Skittles by my side, and the moments in which I see people trying to put him in a trans box just because he wears makeup or has long hair, it really terrifies me to think that, because there's hate towards the community overall, not just trans people, that somebody might just want to peg him in a box, and that's that, and then one day the story is about Skittles, and I. You know what I mean? And I think that I just think it's important that we understand that sometimes when we think these things don't affect us as closely as they can, you're wrong. You're wrong. And our proximities, the three of us at this table, even to Camila, I didn't get to meet Camila personally. Skittles knew Camila. Camila was a fan of our work. You know what I mean? And it's just how have I made sure that, because I'm circling the same rooms as somebody like Camila, that people know that, as a community, we don't tolerate that shit, right? And I'm not saying that the reason Camila's, ended up, deciding to end her life was because of the rooms she was in, specifically in our artistic community. Pero coño, if you walk through life, and even if you have just that one safe space, sometimes that's what it takes. That is what it takes, is to have that one safe space, or that one person who will have your back. And we really, really can't wait until it's a story like that, or the story that I fear, and I really do fear that in my heart. I shit you not. And I think it's the first time I've said it out loud. You know what I mean? It's not sufficient. We're not doing sufficient work. And it needs to be done. And there's a lot of layers. There's a lot to, I get it. But we have to start somewhere, and we need to prioritize this. That's really all I had to say. Woo! Ladies who don't check out. Don't drink and feel. Disclaimer, do not drink and feel.
Or do.
Yeah.
I think that the one last thing that I wanted to add on to the tail end of this subject is that, as someone who, gender identity, I feel that gender identity is a journey,
Yes.
And as someone who was brought up identifying as a gay man, and now has gone into identifying as gender nonconforming, and exploring pronouns and wearing makeup, and being more femme and embracing that side of me, because this isn't something that developed overnight. This is something that has literally always been a part of me and has always been innate, you know, like just embedded in me. I don't understand where the hate comes from. Like, to have somebody, to hate someone so much and not know them, to put them in front of a car and shoot them and be laughing and all that stuff. Like, and I guess if there was ever a community that could relate to this the most, it'd be the Black community,
right,
with racism and the extreme things that happen with that. But I just don't understand where that hate comes from, you know? And, like, I can't control it, you know? Like, I can't control this part of me. Why does this create this feeling inside of anybody else?
And I think, you know, like, for you as, like, a gay man or a gay non-binary person to feel like I don't understand that is so valid. And I encourage those of us who have identities that don't experience that, right? So folks who are either straight, who are cis, aka who, you know, feel comfortable in their own gender assignment at birth, to be the ones to investigate more. Why is it that this happens? Why is it that people feel this much hatred about a person entering the bathroom or whatnot? What is it about this person that makes us quote unquote uncomfortable? Where does that uncomfortability actually, where is it rooted? You know, I feel like it is our responsibility to do that work, to undo that, to hold other people's hands, and call them in, not call them out, but call them in, because by calling them out, we're going to ostracize them and they're going to feel, you know, exiled. So, you know, I want to echo what you feel, and that what you feel is absolutely valid. Right. That, you know, you don't understand why folks would ever have this type of hatred. But I want to call on other folks who don't fall within the LGBTQI+ community, queer community, to do that heavy lifting, to do that labor, to research and to understand why, in order to then educate other folks.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And it's ignorance, right? But it's uprooting the ignorance, right? And understanding what feeds the tree.
Oh my God. Wait, pass the salt?
Wow. All right, and now it is time for our plate of the day. So, capitalizing and crippling the coochie. How advertising has defined standards for women through product advertisements. So, you know, first of all, we know that gender norms are a thing. We know that advertising media, blah, 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 informs a lot of the opinions as to why things are the way they are, even down to this concept of getting a wedding ring and being proposed to in a certain way was a marketing scheme. Ooh. The idea that blue is for boys and pink is for girls was a marketing scheme. That. Like, you know, like all of this, like we know marketing plays a heavy hand in how we are socialized. It is fact. It is written in books, right? So I've always been that bitch who, like, even growing up, would watch commercials. First of all, the thing I would notice the most was how, like, none of the women looked like me, and they were all white women. And even when it was, like, on Univision and shit, I'd be like, yeah, a white woman. That's still a white woman. You know. But the way in which not only are they prescriptive in terms of, like, what the women look like, but they're prescriptive on how you should be indulging and experiencing these products, right? And it's still framed. So, like, this idea that it's, like, you know, if I'm showering with herbal essences, I feel like a powerful blah blah blah, and it's just like the way that you should be experiencing this is the same. And I remember, and the reason I use herbal essences as an example is because I remember when I would fight with my mom, why can't I use that? Why can't I use that? Why can't I use that? Because she would often buy productos from DR and stuff like that for my hair.
Because of sulfate,
right? And you know, and I didn't know any of that shit. And that's before I was woke with my hair. I was still getting my blowouts and shit. And because in my head I'm like, well, when I get my blowouts at the end and this happens, experience. Like, that can happen on my head. But I didn't understand my hair and the roots of my hair. And I, like, into this age is when I've seen my hair look like this. So in my head, when these products would get used and people would be like, "Ah, no, eso no sirve para tu cabello," I'd be like, why? Because I'm black? That's weird. Why can't I have this flowy experience? And the detangling is never, it was always... You know what I mean? And I'm like, why is the product like telling me how this experience should be? And then when I don't have that experience, I set myself up for disappointment. I judge myself. I feel like I am not the archetype of a woman and what women are desired to be, because even through the use of your product, I don't even have that right. You know, in addition to all of these other norms and all of these other things that people put upon us. So, you know, that's how I came up with the plan of the day today, was really meditating on some of that. And Kat, you've done some work around thinking about products that are advertised towards women and how we can reshape some of these narratives. Can you give us a little insight on the project you worked on recently?
I think what you are trying to get to is, most recently, even though for a really long time people have called me an influencer, I just recently, for the first time ever, signed my first quote-unquote influencer contract, and that was with You by Kotex. And for my first assignment with them, you know, they gave me a lot of liberty. I don't just say yes to a lot of contracts or folks who want to work with me, because I take in consideration the audience that I have built, the voice that is important to me, the issues that are important to me. And when you deal with brands, it's kind of difficult because it gets problematic.
Right.
Wow, my voice went very high for that.
Is that problematic? Is that problematic?
But I did work with You by Kotex years ago, and they approached me yet again. And what appealed to me was the liberty, the creative liberty. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to share this story that one of the first assignments that I did for them, for me, what I did was make a video entitled 3 Periods. And how I constructed this video was a lot of B-roll, aka like no one's really talking into camera. It's just voiceover. I recorded conversations with my grandmother and then my mother. My grandmother on my mother's side, about, you know, their introduction to their periods, you know, when they got their period, what their their mother said to them, what it felt like. And I used lots of like insert shots, kind of reenacting those moments. And, you know, I used like faux blood in these reenactments. And I showed Kotex this video, and, you know, unfortunately, due to, I guess, their brand guides, they rejected that video because they wanted the faux blood to be extracted from that video.
Right, because even in the ads we usually see, they pour a cup
blue.
of water.
Blue. Yeah.
The blue.
It's still,
which, you know, for years, I didn't realize that in those commercials, the blue was supposed to be blood.
Yeah.
Like, I never realized that until my adult years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for me, that was a weird experience because they specifically reached out to me and contracted me in order to call out the taboos, right? And part of the taboo is seeing the blood, you know, like normalizing the fact that like women bleed.
Right.
And that's just what happens.
Right.
And so that video actually didn't fit into the quota of me being an influencer, and I just posted that as like independently posting it, and it did really well in terms of views. I forget how many views it got, specifically like on IG. Oh, I'm looking right now, like 139,000 views on IG. But you know, due to their criteria and due to how much further they have to grow as a brand, they rejected that. I forget what you asked me. But
No. Yeah, just the experience. You know, I just want to hear about the experience of that, because clearly your campaign was coming from a place of the true experience that you were having as a woman who used this product.
But I want to emphasize, you know, like that video, 3 Periods, kind of drew people on the journey of my grandmother, who grew up in Colombia. She went to a nunnery for as a school. I forget what the exact term is. And so she was very shamed when it came to her period. Like, you were not supposed to talk about your period at all. You were very siloed. And then, of course, my grandmother passed that on to my mom.
Right.
And then my mom, as being one of 7 or one of 5 women in her, as her siblings, she found it really weird. And so she took it upon herself to, when then she had both me and my sister, to be like, no, fuck this. Like, I'm going to teach my daughters something different. And so I grew up with a mother who, like, from day one was like, she brought me into the bathroom, and I saw my mom as she had her period, you know, like, throw out her pad. My mom didn't use tampons.
Right.
Throw out her pad. And, like, my mom tells me stories of how when I was little, I would be like, I want to wear a pad. And so before I even had my period, I would walk around with, like, a huge bulge.
That's hilarious.
That's a whole nother combo. Like a bulge in my pants, you know, wearing, like, an adult size pad. And so that's what the video that I made was, kind of encompassing how, like, the stigma around menstruation kind of lessened with each generation, allowing us to be more free and more accepting of our menstruation.
Yeah, no, and I remember when I saw the video, I fucking loved it, and I shared it. I think I shared it a few times actually, because I was like, yes, this is the story. My period story was very different, where my mom was very uncomfortable talking about these things but my mom was an orphan by the age of 13. Like, you know, she did not grow up with her mother being the one who, like, taught her, because her mother died before her father. So I forget how young she was when her mom died, but she was pre-menstruation age, right? So, like, for her, navigating that space was very awkward. And so when she got that paper from school that was like, oh, can your child participate in sex education class stuff? At first she was like, no. And then she was kind of like, actually, I don't want to do this shit myself. You know what I mean? So I know. So I learned my like, sort of like, you know, puberty education through a program in school. But it was very technical. And I remember thinking, like, you know, when I get my period, it's going to flow out of me like what I saw in the commercials. Like, so the same rate at which the cup is releasing that blue liquid, I thought that periods meant that I was going to be like an open faucet of blood, like, just like, you know what I mean? Just like, and I think that's important to note, just to say that, like, especially as a woman, like, even though I was a young woman and I wasn't at that point in my life yet when I was watching those ads, I was digesting the standard of, like, what my experience was going to be moving forward. And so, and I'll add on again, and when I'm not seeing people of color, you know what I mean? And then when, as a woman of color, I have a different experience, and this is not so much with pads, and now more talking about hair or makeup and things like that. When I don't have the same experience as the person I saw in the ad, I start to then feel less than, because I don't match what it's supposed to do. Yeah. Like, if this product is magic, the magic don't work on me because I'm Black, and, you know.
And that's what I went to school for advertisement. I actually went to FIT and studied advertising and marketing communications, because I thought that was the way I was going to change media. And so that is honestly the way they teach you. It's like an open blanket generalization of how to market to people, right? So when it comes to periods, it's like general, it's like PMS, oh my god, this sucks, we use white women, we use this. And I told you prior to recording, it's like, I actually never experienced PMS, so I felt really, really, really outside of, like, the general consensus of, like, how women feel when they're on their periods. And now that I'm almost 30, I researched, and most recently I've been feeling the feelings of, like, general PMSing, right? So of like mood swings, of like crying, of like depression, of having cravings and being like, wait, what the hell is this? You know, like, why is this happening now? I'm almost 30. You know, what is going on? And really, like, do advertisements tell you that, like, PMS can also spike and change from when you hit puberty and when you're 30? No, they don't tell you that.
Right.
Absolutely not. They use a very blanket statement of what your menstruation looks like, you know? And when you do that, you ostracize people and you make people feel bad. And you can, and that's used in advertisement of Latinidad, you know, like, if you don't fit into this general blanket statement of fitting into quote unquote Latinidad, of being like light skinned, kind of ambiguous, caramel, DK brown, you know, then you don't fit into it, and then people question who you are and why you don't look like them. And that fits into all forms of advertisement, whether that's menstruation, whether that's like, you know, ethnic marketing, etc., etc.
Yeah, and then it doesn't allow you to know that some of the products we're consuming as women, it's because it's a response to something that maybe is a little gross, and maybe it's like, I think of deodorant commercials, and I think like how there's always like butterflies and shit popping out the bitch's armpit when she's putting the thing on, and it's just like, oh, okay, so like that's what it is. Then the opposite of what I guess smelly and man like is butterflies and flowers popping out of my armpits.
Do you do you remember when Secret slogan was strong enough for a man, made for a woman?
Yeah.
I, for some reason, throughout this entire and even the idea of like having this conversation, that was the first thing that popped into my head. Like having that ad where it was like, I remember the ads were always like these men in a gym and they're all sweating, and it was this ad for deodorant that was catered towards women. Yeah. And obviously they've changed that nowadays, but.
Yeah, but also like, okay, I think of, sorry, no, finish your thought.
No, I think that was done to me.
And I think of Degree, or, well, Old Spice has gone the comedy route, like, but before they weren't necessarily like comedic. But when I think of like, what was Degree? Is that the one that it is? I'm looking at the logo. Anyway, I think it's Degree. So, and it's just like, it would be guys like pumping iron. And then it was like dark background, and then like, you know, close up of the arms, close up of the thing, and it'd be like, men, stay fresh with Degree, and it was like this like powerful, like, you know what I mean? And I'd watch that, but like, where's the ad of a Serena Williams on the court? You know, like that same energy is real, right? Yep. Like, fuck it. Let me say something. Sometimes when we a little bigger, we sweat a little more. Sometimes the experience don't need to be you on a tennis court. It can be you running for the bus.
Secret. What they're not advertising is how Secret and Dove and all these deodorants are great for chafing thighs. You put that shit in between your legs.
Thighs. Like, you know what? We have an issue where, as someone who started a YouTube channel and who really like, you know, took on social media in order to combat the norms of traditional media, we now see social media influencers take on the traditional, really oppressive, toxic behaviors of traditional media. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is then people like myself who, you know, have a big following on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, or what have you, or YouTube, you know, are given opportunities to advertise certain products. Well, then you don't really advertise them in a way that's realistic, you know, that like, you know, what have you, have a deodorant, as you said, you know, and be like, well, you know, like I really sweat sometimes, and actually I don't use my deodorant just in my armpits. I use it also on my thighs. What you see is a lot of like people advertise and mimic traditional advertisements, right? So it's just like, hey, me smiling at the beach. Oh my God, use the deodorant. Hashtag, you know, self-love.
Yep.
And
use the deodorant. Self-love.
I will say, you know, I was really hesitant when I was approached by Kotex to come on board as a influencer. One, because folks had been calling me an influencer for a really long time, and I hadn't actually signed any contract that considered me as an influencer. And secondly, because I didn't want to be forced to create content by anyone's means, you know, anyone's direction. I have been making a name for myself under my own guidelines. And so what appealed to me by Kotex was they were like, no, we want you to do exactly what you do. Of course, there's always a compromise there. But for the most part, I was able to do whatever I wanted to do, you know? So I was able to make an entire, like, literally 4 photo shoot being like, this is what women do on their period. We are still really active on our period. We play soccer and make it very, like, avant-garde. I was able to challenge myself as a producer and produce, like, a 4-part photo series. I was also able to use the pronouns they and make sure that, like, when it comes to periods, it's not just she. I know there were a couple of people who came onto my Instagram and asked me, you know, this is a little bit transphobic because you are not including trans women who don't have their period or men who still menstruate. But at the end of the day, I was only able to use myself as a subject. That was in my contract. That's why they contracted me, was to use myself as a subject. But I made sure that the pronouns I used were not just specific to women, right? Because I acknowledge that there are men who still menstruate. And so I think small little victories like that are really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's just like, you know, I think one of the big takeaways here is just like there's a way in which we have been conditioned, and there's certain like products and ways in which I view products that are geared towards women, and I still find myself thinking, oh, well, do I fit into that box? So is that product for me? And recently for me, it's been more about hair products. And like even in this curly hair space, I've always lived in a weird space of like, I'm not super girly, but I'm not a tomboy either. You know what I mean? So like if you're advertising too sporty and too whatever that, like, I'm like, oh, that's dope. I can't run like that bitch. Like, you know what I mean? Like I'm not that bitch. But then I see, and then, you know, a lot of it is like the products are being represented by the women who are creating the products, which is awesome. And I'm like, wow, and I'm nothing like these women. So when I'm looking at the advertising and stuff, I'm like, you know, obviously I'm old enough to decipher like, oh, this is a product and it's a good product, so I'm going to use it despite how it's advertised. But like sometimes when you're in spaces or events and you're seeing the activations around, and I think of it because when we go to conferences like YouTube's conference or Hispanicize, and they have booths, right? And you're like in the face of how this brand is choosing to present itself outside of my screen. I feel weird. I feel like even in like taking like whatever post pictures and whatever step and repeat thing they have, I feel like I don't even fit that mold. So like, I can skip that picture, or I only do it because Skittles is like, no, this is good for content. And I'm like, okay, you're right, because it's good for content. But like, I don't feel like I'm this girl. I'm not the poster child, essentially, is what I'm saying. And so there are ways in which I still buy into the fact that I'm not the poster child, but there are some brands who are trying. I don't know that anyone has gotten it perfect, but I remember when Dove did that beauty campaign, and it was like, okay, so rather than, and this is what I mean, like now commercials want to be making whole movies for their shit. Great. So now don't sell me the bullshit of like, you needed to stay within certain frames, because if you can have a whole military story be a car commercial, let's say, for example, like, then why can't we dig into these topics in a certain way? And Dove did this lightly when they did a campaign years ago where they asked people to describe themselves and had an artist like draw them, and they looked really ugly, but then they had people who knew them describe them, and the picture looked so much like drastically different. And that campaign to me was so powerful, because as I was seeing the people describe themselves, I was like, how would I describe myself? And I started to be like, wow, bitch, your shit would be real ugly if you did this. And it taught me something. And it's like, I happen to not use Dove soap because I like natural soaps and, you know, oils and shit like that. But I respect the brand, but there's a respect for the brand. You know what I mean? And there's an engagement of that brand where I don't throw shade to Dove, and I don't shade people for throwing Dove. And not that I shade people for using other products, unless it's like Chick-fil-A, and this is now food industry. Unless it's like something that is very clearly problematic and you're still engaging it. But like, yeah, I don't know. I just think like I think about these things a lot, because I still am in the process of discovering the kind of woman I define myself as. You know, like, yes, I know I'm straight. Yes, I like to think I'm powerful. Yes, I'm black as fuck. Yes, I'm Latinx as fuck. But like, what else is like? But like, what does that mean about who I am? Like, what are my behaviors? What are my tendencies? What are the things I care about? Like, and advertising has played such a role in the way in which I feel I can or cannot express that. So I just thought it was important to dig into the topic.
Yeah.
And I think everything is an advertisement.
Right.
I think some people fool themselves into being like, I am not a brand.
Right.
You know, and
right.
I even use that terminology of like, I'm not a brand, but in itself, I know that I am.
Right.
You know, that people reach out to me for a specific type of voice, for a specific type of energy. You know, people are going to reach out to y'all for a specific type of energy. And that in itself is a brand. And so respecting, you know, like you said, like you respect that Dove advertisement that spoke truth, you know, to a certain degree of like what beauty standards are, and kind of highlighted that and allowed other people to see themselves in that.
Right. Absolutely. That's what happens after you eat a bite of yogurt. Activia. Because that's how I take a shit on the toilet when I eat yogurt that's supposed to help me shit.
Oh my goodness.
You know. Yeah. Well,
what are some, like, I just, like, as a one last little thing, what are some, like, super ridiculous ads that you can remember right now? I know I mentioned the made for a man or made for a woman. You know what the fuck I just said.
I mean, I think some of the ridiculous ones have been definitely, I don't want to open up a new can of conversation. I'm excited to see how you all edit this. Are a lot of advertisements that are shown during Super Bowl.
Yes.
Because Super Bowl is a time where advertisers understand the eyeballs, right? It is a time for millions of people who are watching. And so folks capitalize on that. So you have brands like Carl's Jr. hop on board and sexualize a hamburger and have like Kim Kardashian or Kate Upton.
Oh my God! Remember GoDaddy when GoDaddy first came out, and it was all sexy women,
and
I was
just
like,
hypersexualization of women. It wasn't actually necessarily hypersexualization of women of color, but just like women in general, which obviously trickles to women of color. And then I think that's ridiculous. You know, it's like, why the fuck would a hamburger be so sexy?
Right.
Or like the super sensitive Google ad that they had up this year. There was like this like ad that we were watching this year.
Sad one.
And it was
really
about
memories, and like I think wasn't it something about Alzheimer, and they like went that route of like memories and like how we capture memories. I liked that commercial.
I'm gonna be honest, I didn't see any of the advertisements. I was just very
waiting for J-Lo.
I was very appalled at the representation of quote unquote Latinidad. But that's another combo.
No, quick tidbit. So after having watched it before, because I felt that way very strongly beforehand, and only ended up actually watching it because my brother, who lives across the street, was already having it on, and Skittles was over, and I was like, all right, well, actually, we went there to eat.
We went there for the food.
Sorry, family. I didn't go there to see you. I actually went there because we were hungry, and so I went and I ate, and obviously it was on, so we watched it, and like, I was surprised to see that so many black dancers and stuff were incorporated. I was disappointed that in seeing that they took the area of opportunity to bring other talent on the stage, like Bad Bunny and stuff like that, that we didn't. And even there was one of the songs, and I can't remember the name because I'm a reggaeton fan, but I'm bad with names of songs and which artists. But there was a song where it was like, I think you were J Balvin or when Bad Bunny was out, that there's another reggaeton artist of color who's on that same song. And like, you know what I mean? I just wanted to see more people of color, but I saw a lot of people of color on the stage, which surprised me. And I feel like they took some nuances to try to highlight to certain issues. Is it sufficient? That's arguable, but I was glad that it wasn't completely dismissive, was how I walked away from it.
Yeah. I was personally, Super Bowl, as someone who has studied advertisement, and in particular the eyeballs that are involved in the Super Bowl halftime show and the advertisements, I was really, really surprised at how many folks were complicit in celebrating the representation of quote unquote Latinidad, with like J-Lo, J Balvin, Shakira, and Bad Bunny. And what I mean by that is that, like, yes, of course you can enjoy the entertainment value. As a Colombian, I was like, yes, Shakira. You know what I mean? Like, so I enjoyed it from an entertainment value, but I also recognize the ways in which on a larger scale and so many millions of people watching, this is what they see as representing quote unquote Latinidad. And so when you say things like, hashtag
Latino gang,
which is a term that's used to quote unquote unify us. Is it actually unifying us if folks are being erased in that representation, right? So, for example, we have, you know, like in the Super Bowl halftime show, a big concentration was reggaeton. So, like, where is the black representation, like Ozuna? You know, like the traditional...
I think it was Ozuna who was on the song, because I remember my niece, it was my 5-year-old niece who asked about the black artist, and I was like, oh shit, this song has a black reggaetonero. Yeah. Sorry,
and
continue.
I don't want to focus a lot on the celebrity factor of like what J-Lo should have done, what Shakira should have done. It's more on, I want to push folks who viewed the halftime show and who had no criticism of the halftime show. Because I think folks like myself who are not black, who fit into the model minority Latino representation of being like this like ambiguous non-black person, you know, we celebrate that because it brings us joy. And so are we upholding anti-blackness because we, you know, we prioritize our joy before the uncomfortability or the erasure of black folks? And so I felt like the halftime show was a missed opportunity for folks like J-Lo and folks like Shakira they're like, I don't know, someone please call me out, but I don't have the statistics, but are they not in like the 1%? You know, they're in this celebrity factor where they could have advocated for other folks to come on board, to take up space.
Here's where like that was one of my immediate like wonderment, not even specifically to them, but like how the show gets produced altogether. There was an article that talks about how, like, first of all, they don't get paid. They're there voluntarily, and the accolade is like, oh, I can say that I did the halftime show. It is produced by the NFL. And they, like, you know what I mean? And so I only say that to say that doesn't mean that their star power isn't enough that they can demand shit. I agree with that. But I just, even like ourselves sometimes when we're working on shit, and similar to what you were saying about the ads of like, oh yeah, like it had to be about me because contractually that's what it was. So I couldn't have a trans person, you know, featured. So I wonder what the logistics of that are. But I also... with both of them, like, and I don't want to bog down on the celebrity factor, but just because they both have made music with black people, like, you know what I mean? Like, even if they were like, oh, we have to stay in our catalog, but let's be intentional about, like, you know, like, let Wyclef Jean come on stage. You know. And they're already star power, and it's hard, right? Because it's tricky. And I also think, just to say, because this conversation is so hard, and like, two things can be true at once. Like you said, it is true that could be a moment of pride, and the performance, like actually like the performance itself was a great performance, and like all that stuff can be true. And people trying to explore this conversation around blackness is not one that's egregious, and like to say that the talent that every person on that stage displayed, not just the celebrities, was of no value. It was of complete value, right? But in a larger NFL argument, and I'll even move away from this, like, you know, black Latinos, my thing was like, even participating in the first place was an erasure of the black people who have been fighting really hard to hold this organization accountable in the first place. You know what I mean?
I want to make it as accessible to people, and when I mean people, I mean non-black people, non-black Latinx people, non-black Latino people, that like maybe you don't know the politics of how J-Lo and Shakira came to accept performing at the halftime show. You don't know the fact that like several other black celebrities have turned it down, like Cardi B, like Rihanna. I was gonna be like Rihanna. Like Rihanna turned it down. I don't even want to get into that. I just want to get into the fact of like, how did we consume it? When you saw J-Lo and when you saw Shakira take to the stage, and when you saw J Balvin and when you saw Bad Bunny take to the stage, how did you consume it? Right. You have to understand that this stage speaks volumes. Right. People pay millions millions of dollars to advertise during this. Close to billions. Close to billions to advertise during this show because they realized the eyeballs that are associated to this show. Yeah. And so when you see quote unquote Latino people being represented, and when it doesn't include any Black people, what does that mean? You know? And when you say that hashtag Latino gang means unification of us, what does it mean when Black folks don't feel unified by the current state of our representation? So if you feel that we are unified, but you hear that people are not unified by this, what are you going to do to ensure that we are unified? Yes. And that doesn't mean that you cannot enjoy entertainment. Exactly. That doesn't mean you can't enjoy the artistry that is, you know, J Balvin, that is Bad Bunny, that is J-Lo, that is Shakira. It doesn't mean that you should be shamed to enjoy the artistry. It just means be a little more critical and ask for more. Yes.
Woo. Beautiful note. Yeah. Beautiful note to end on. Kat, thank you so much for being with us today. Any shout outs? Where can we find you?
You can find me on all platforms, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, etc., all under the same handle, which is It's Kat LAZO.
Awesome, awesome. Skittles, where can they find us?
Well, you guys can find us at Ladies Who Brunch on Instagram, Ladies Who Brunch on YouTube, Ladies Brunch on Twitter, and on all your favorite streaming platforms.
Awesome. Thanks for tuning in, guys. And until next time, bronche.
Bronche.
Bronche, bronche. That's how we say brunch.
Here's to the ladies who say basic with their lunch.
You want that bochinche?
Paquete con pinche. You know what they said?
Not too busy, glasses thinking.
Aquí en esta mesa se respeta como ñón.
Si la copa está llena, yo te doy la bendición.
So what if we get ratchet?
We from the Bronx.
That's it.
Don't get it twisted.
We be going to Manhattan. Be a queen.
Be a boss.
Ladies who brunch popping off.
Hey.